Hi Flosstube, it's time for another Travels with Tricia. And today what we're going to do is we're going to go to New York City and we're going to visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art and into their rather new British galleries, which has a small room which is dedicated to English embroidery, in fact of the Tudor and Stuart time. So we'll go there and we'll see what's on display and we'll look at it really close up. I had a new camera that I was using at the time, so I'm really amazed at what I was able to get in such a dark space. So we're gonna go there. So that's gonna be a lot of fun, taking a look at what there is at the Metropolitan. First though, I really need to say a gigantic thank you to everybody who has been registering for the Martha Edlund mini course and give you an update on the amounts that we have raised for the Victoria and Albert Museum. We've raised already almost just under $3,000 for the department. Now I know we can actually make that total a lot higher because I do have more room in my license. And so hopefully maybe this weekend you have some time to register and to take a look at what is in the mini course. And for those of you who do not know, that's all centered around this little cutie right here. So I have been, and if you haven't watched any other Flosstubes, you don't know that I've been researching a woman named Martha Edlund, who was born in 1658, and she embroidered the best known set of schoolgirl pieces of the 17th century. A casket, a jewelry box, 2 samplers, and a whole bunch of little teeny miniatures. And not much was known about her, but her pieces are just written about all the time. But so anyways, I investigated her, and there is a 45-minute lecture in the $15 mini course that you can watch about her biography, and she is not a boring woman at all. I've gotten a lot of you guys who have been emailing me, putting comments, etc., going, wow, I had no idea that Martha was so interesting. Then there is a 40-minute video on her embroideries, talking about the embroideries that she did with close-up pictures of them. And then there is the project, which we call Martha's Rose, right here. And the project instructions are downloadable as part of that. But this is also an exploration into filament silk, which is what Martha used on all of her pieces and all of the girls in the 17th century used. And so I've realized that not everybody has been taught how to use filament silk threads. And so what I did is I put together a video of how you actually manipulate the threads when you're working with them so they don't bounce off the surface and then your needle catches in them and it kind of makes a mess. I hear a lot of people complaining about filament silk, but I think it's just because we don't teach everybody how to handle it. And so it goes over why it needs to be handled differently from spun silks or cotton floss, and then how to do it with this video. And I've received probably just as many people emailing me or making comments about the silk, the filament silk video as about the Martha Edlund biography. So that was really, that was something I did not expect. And that's exciting. There's a lot of interest in trying to use filament silk. So if this weekend you want to register for it, it's a great time. You get 31 days to watch it as many times as you want. So now, but right before we go to see the Met and the materials, I've gotten a couple little questions on the side asking, well, you know, how is it that you travel so often? And so I thought I'd give a little explanation about that. My business, Thistle Threads, is actually divided into 2 pieces. One is really the embroidery instruction and kind of manufacture of threads portion of it. And then the other half of it is actually research on embroidery. So sometimes I'm going to a museum or a location because I have something that I need to see to research. And sometimes I'm going to a museum because I like to give back. You know, when somebody lets me see something and research a piece in their collection, they often find out about the things that I am interested in, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, you have microscopy experience, or you know how gold threads are manufactured, or these stitches are done, etc. Metallurgy background, things like that, and they will ask me to look at something of theirs, or maybe do a public program or a conference, or work with their textile conservators on something, or lend some expertise to a project that they're working on. And I'm always happy to give back, to travel to where they are and do a little joint work for them, a little work for myself. And now I'm kind of adding you guys to the backpack to go with me on some of those adventures. So with that said, let's get in the backpack and let's go to the city that never sleeps.
So here I am at the Metropolitan Museum of Fine Arts, having a hot dog outside on the steps on a cold day. I'm here for the 50th anniversary of the Textile Conservation Department, which I am a member of the visiting board. This is kind of a frequent thing for me, coming down to the Met for a day or two and spending a day in meetings, and then also a day playing tomorrow in the lab, working on various projects I'm working on with some of the staff. Hopefully, if there's some time after all the wonderful lectures we've been listening to today, I will take you into the British galleries to see a little bit of embroidery.
A few years ago, the British galleries at the Met were rebuilt. The entrance to them is on the ground floor to the right after passing through the central medieval galleries. You are immediately greeted by this installation of the carved oak panels from a house on the Hall Quay, Great Yarmouth in Norfolk. It was made at the end of the 16th century during Queen Elizabeth's reign. As you pass through the galleries, you get to a 17th century staircase with really exquisite naturalistic carvings from the Castlebury House, a now lost manor house, and it has been re-erected like an enormous jigsaw puzzle and takes you to a tiny gallery of embroidery, which is kind of cool. You get to walk up the staircase. One thing that has been fun about being involved with the Met behind the scenes has been finding out about some of the ways exhibits are built, things are conserved, and the care that they take in recording some of this information and putting it out to the public. As an example, there is a great video about the reconstruction of this staircase, and I will link to it in the notes below. There is also a video about the Textile Conservation Department for the 50th anniversary, also in the notes. If you watch slowly for a big red silk cloth with incredible gold needle lace stitches with a peacock all around it in a coiling stem design, this is actually a project that I've been working on for 3 years with Christina Carr and Mary Brooks, and hopefully I can let you know in the future when the publication of the many papers we have written on this are available. At the top of the staircase are 2 small galleries, with one on the left being the needlework room. This is a changing display with rotations of objects, so we're seeing the current rotation of late 2023, early 2024. The first object is a silk and metal thread panel that has been cut on several edges. It is believed to be a cushion cover or pillow bear, a decorative embroidered cover for a pillow. This design is made up of individual flower stems called slips, which usually contain the flower or fruit, an offshoot showing a bud or an immature fruit, 1 or more leaves, and then the root. It was a common decorative motif of the period and drawn in a C or an S shape, and it could be placed close together to emulate a continuous design. Slip designs could be worked on one piece of linen and then the extra spaces filled with bugs, butterflies, and birds, like this one, as well as a lot of spangles, or instead cut out of the linen and applied to a large piece of heavy silk satin or velvet and outlined with a gimp or a twisted gold thread. The bonus of working slips for decoration of larger textiles as applique was that many people could work slips, and thus a workshop could quickly finish a commission of a set of bed hangings. So the design of repetitive but different flowers could be used to speed what would otherwise be a year or years long project for one individual. This is a feature of professional work, choosing a design that appears at first glance like it is repetitive, but placing the repeated motifs far enough away from each other that you can't see both at once by the part of your vision that actually can see detail, which is really in the center of your eye. In some of the embroideries in this case, that is the trick, being used to keep you from realizing that there are differences between motifs that are attributable to different embroiderers working on the same piece, speeding the completion of the piece. No workshop could afford to pay its workers for a year to be able to make a piece and then collect from the buyer when they sold it to them. So tricks in design and stitch choice were made to allow them to work items in groups if large enough to sit around, or fabricate with additions of applique pieces worked on a different frame. On this panel, the technique being used is visual confusion. Between the close proximity of motifs and the blinding flash of spangles, it is hard to see where the end of one motif is and the beginning of another starts. Also, there is not that much repetition, as the number of individual motifs is actually staggering. We have fruits and flowers I can't identify, as well as peas, pears, grapes, roses, eggplant, sweet peas, old roses, something that looks like an orange, pomegranate, strawberries, acorns, pansy, daffodil or narcissus, thistle, honeysuckle, marigold, cherries, and then, of course, those unknown ones. I mean, that's a lot of motifs. The majority of the colored silk work on this piece is done in detached buttonhole with return. This is a needle lace stitch. There is some excellent photography of this piece in the online collection catalog, which you can download and magnify to verify. I will put links to it in the notes below. Detached buttonhole with return is worked as shown in this figure with a long thread across the surface, which is caught in the buttonhole row worked across the figure. Normally, and in most of this piece, it is worked with one thread in the needle, but the embroiderers were more creative than that. They could instead lay a silver thread across the figure instead, and then use the silk to buttonhole over it. It is blackened now, but would have been a really shiny, bright whitish color then. We can see that on this orange, although it was worked in the round for extra credit here. And then in a few places, they threaded a silver thread and a silk thread in the same needle and worked the detached buttonhole with return. Pretty difficult. I have seen pieces where that is done quite a lot over the piece. Definitely a lot of expertise in handling those two threads in the same needle. I see that technique in this unknown fruit at the top of the piece. There is a second one of this particular unknown fruit at the motif at the bottom, and was likely worked by a different professional, as they didn't get the memo on what the person at the top was doing. In this one, they are using what I call a candy cane thread to shade for their stuffed detached buttonhole with return version of that fruit. Here is what I mean by a candy cane thread, and I made this one by using a cream ply and a pink ply and twisting them together using a Japanese embroidery technique to make my thread. Then, if you worked detached buttonhole with this thread, that's the middle stripe between the pink stripe and the cream stripe. But if you work it between the two stripes of the pure colors, you created this variegated look, which kind of looks like the color is transitioning. That makes a third color to shade with without buying another skein of something different. The pea pods have this technique in them as well, to shade from a green to a yellow. It is fun to see the creativity at the closest level. But this is also an economic choice that can help us understand professional workshops. If you can shade between two colors by combining them, you don't need a third thread. We all know that a piece is cheaper when it uses less colors or less skeins of thread. This was the same then. So could you give the illusion of having a set of 12 colors from only having 6 and using up more of the skein? Any leftover thread that is sitting on the shelf is money wasted in a commercial company, and its profit lost. The panel above it is 22 inches by 24 inches, in tent, goblin, and couching stitches. The stitches are something that is in the repertoire of many stitchers, especially today, and that period, but it is a difficult piece to figure out who might have done it, as it is a great deal of effort, but yet size-wise, it's kind of in the possibility of both an individual to work it or a group to sit around the four sides working it. The back of the piece was obscured by an attachment of a large piece of linen at some point in its life, and so we can't study the type of needlepoint stitch used in different areas, as well as the direction of those stitches, so that stitcher's seated position could be determined. The use of different ways to do the needlepoint, tent stitch, basket weave, half cross, etc., could tell us if the work was of one person or more, as each person may have their favorite way of getting a half diagonal stitch on the front of it. The design is really well composed, and looking at it closer, you notice motifs drawn on it that were also on the stump work and casket drawings. And I'm not talking about, oh, they've got a unicorn there. I'm talking about the drawing of the unicorn matches, or the drawing of that particular flower matches what's on many of the stump work and casket pieces. So we can insinuate that the stitcher had this piece drawn by the person that was also drawing those pieces. The tree of life in the middle, with its grapevine wrappings around it, appears as a fruit and nut tree as if it has been grafted together. Grafting was a new and exciting technique in horticulture with religious overtones of the Garden of Eden. Surrounding it are slips and larger animals and birds. The sun and moon as shown together, as they are always on the Garden of Eden imagery. In front of the tree is a very shiny river with fishes and a swan and a kingfisher. The stitcher expertly used very long satin stitches of untwisted filament silk, but they would catch and droop, so they were all held in place by a diagonal grid of threads that were laid over the top of the satin stitching, and then each junction of the two grids that were the two sets of parallel lines were couched over. This technique is a trick of professionals even today, but that isn't enough to say that the piece was actually professional work. The trunk of the tree was actually worked in brown filament silk in exactly the same way. The background is worked in Goblin stitch with green silk so that the rest of the flowers, fruits, and beasts stand out against this luscious background. At some point, I'm going to do something like this, maybe a casket. I know of a casket done this way as well, and it's really an effective look. So you can see that there's a line, like a hillock, that has been worked into the background Goblin stitch, which is just an empty space there instead of an actual line. It's very clever how they broke up. They wanted to have the green going all the way across, but they kind of needed the animals to stand on something instead of standing on the edge of the water. So they did this little hillock in green. The next piece is a coif, where all the motifs of the scrolling vine are outlined in silver thread using reverse chain, and then a fine linen thread has been used to work very fine cut work and drawn thread areas for petals and shapes, or pulled thread motifs like eyelets. Spangles fill extra pre-planned spaces, such as this maybe rose or marigold and the pomegranate. Notice how incredibly small the dove's eyes are and the larger 8-petaled flowers that fill the strawberry. This was extremely creative. And when the metal thread was bright, an amazing contrast between someone's presumably dark hair and the white embroidery ringed by silver. The thin lines of the reverse chain used for the coiling stems has the date of this piece leading to the Elizabethan period, when designs seen in paintings in white or black work were large floral motifs hanging off delicate stems. It wasn't until the end of that era that the stems became thick and needed more beefy metal thread stitches to fill them. There is a series of designs drawn in multiple manuscripts by Thomas Trevelyan that show this transition. His books were worked from 1608 to 1616. The 1608 books have more of these single line coiling stems, and the ones that are from 1616 have more higher proportion of the designs with the double line, where you need a very thick stem. The lace pieces on display represent a border and a collar, both of bobbin lace, but made to look like the needle lace, punta and aria, of the period, with much of its motifing based on a rectangular grid. This is transitional bobbin lace, a less expensive alternative to needle lace, as it took less labor to make. Yet, yes, it is still extremely labor intensive. Both pieces are 17th century Genoese lace. At this point, while the images are a little grainy, you might be asking, what camera was I using? In reality, this is a pretty pretty dark room, and you could still see from the earlier pan of the case, you could see how dark it was. I was a good 18 inches to 2 feet from the pieces at best. Well, I've mastered the use of digital cameras for close macro photos when I'm right over a piece in a well-lit examination room, but now there is an equally as great telephoto situation for low light ones. This is actually the new iPhone 15 Pro camera system that you can carry in your pocket as part of your phone. It does amazingly well for situations where there is low light by taking a longer exposure and making a digital telephoto. In some situations, the stitch can be deduced if you know what things look like up close, and then standing a little away from them. But really, these lace pictures are pretty amazing when you know that I was in a dark room and that they were feet away under glass. Many of you expert in the ways of bobbin lace could certainly make a pattern or work from this. The last piece is a circa 1600 panel that may have been a cushion cover, but also has some strange piecings on the right-hand side with 4 separate chunks being sewn together to extend the piece into a rectangle. The date of the reassembly is not known, and the back is obscured by a large piece of linen that stabilizes it. The thin coiling stem has this piece leaning into the Elizabethan age, so it is possible that this was part of a different shaped textile that was repurposed into a cushion. There are pieces of this age that are in black work, as often seen in portraits, that are also cushions, except they are also puzzle pieced together. Some are not just one cushion, but obviously several that were pieced from something else, and all from the same original set. Were we talking about petticoats refashioned, or something else entirely? Or were these originally cushions and wear has destroyed parts, and so 3 cushions are made into 2 sometime in the life of the pieces? A very closely related set of panels in the collection, which I will link to in the notes, are a cushion in the Met collection, another 2 in the V&A collection, and 1 at Whitney Antiques, all from the same bed. They are known to have been sold from the collection of the Earl of Abingdon in 1928, so originally they belonged together. These types of details on when they appeared on the market and how are important clues. During the 1920s to 1940s, it was routine to break up sets, and they became dispersed to different public and private collection. In fact, there is a famous set of tent-stitch slip bed hangings, which are in the V&A, and then there are many of those slips which are at Cora Ginsburg for sale, and I happen to have purchased in the late 1990s, early 2000s, a set of slips that are on the wall in my kitchen. They are all from the same original set of bed hangings. It's just whether or not the material that was of the hanging was in good condition, and then the antique dealers, if it was in bad condition, cut the slips out of them, framed them, and sold them as different pieces, and the 2 curtains that were in good condition ended up in a museum collection. So sometimes you got to try to piece together what happened to these embroideries since their original use. When you realized that your eyes continued the pattern over the now obvious to you cut and resewn pieces that don't match, it is easier to understand that by spreading like motifs out and also making the pattern dense and confusing, you can cover up the differences in how motifs were worked and thus also who did them. This was a key consideration when we were choosing the pattern for the Plymouth jacket. I set down the requirement that the design had to have more than 4 motifs so we could space the motifs enough so that hand couldn't be compared. In that case, we ended up with 12 major motifs, and so it was easy to hide the work of almost 90 individuals. But our variation on the Plymouth jacket wasn't as much as on this very large piece.
Let's talk about how this particular row of carnations and roses, they alternate the way that they are worked in terms of the color and the types of stitches. See how in this carnation it's mainly pale with a little bit of outline of red, and the same with this rose. And then you get to the next one in the pattern and it's much more red. And the same with the rose. And then you continue to come along and that pattern repeats in terms of the coloration and the stitches as we go along this way.
you notice that there are a repeat of 2 by 3 on the piece, but really because of the way that they've repeated their stitches and their colors, it's really more of a 4 by 3 pattern. You have the top row with the borage and the grapes, and the borage and the grapes go in pairs of 2 with how the borages change in the way that they've been stitched. You see up here at the top. And then you go down to the next set of borages, and they are offset so that you get, it looks like it's a much more complicated pattern. Here's the third row with that unknown flower at the moment, as well as the pansy. And you can see how the 2 are in one type of stitching, then these 2 are in a different type of coloration and stitch choices, and then they go back to the first type again as it goes across, and then the second type. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that trip to New York City and the tiny little gallery that holds all of the 17th century embroidery that's always on display. It changes quite often. If you're going to be in New York City at all in the next couple months, once the next costume exhibition opens up, there is a really wonderful piece of 17th century embroidery that will be in the Met costume exhibition. The big ball that happens, the Met Gala. There'll be a piece in the exhibition once that gala is done that you might want to check out. And I hope that I'll be able to go there and maybe film a little bit in that particular gallery and show you the piece that I'm talking about. And if you get to New York, go see what's in the gallery. It might be different than what I showed because things do have to rotate because they are light sensitive. But I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe, and please go and check out the Martha Edlund mini course this weekend, or next weekend or whenever, and help us push up those totals for the Victoria and Albert Museum.